Good evening, and welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we are tracking a collision of forces in the global energy landscape that should have every single person paying attention.
And I'm Maya Clarity. From the narrow waters of the Strait of Hormuz to the shuttered coal mines of Appalachia, from the nuclear fuel cycle to the solar panels on suburban rooftops, tonight's stories are all connected by one thread. The world is changing its energy sources whether governments want it to or not, and the consequences are massive.
We're going to start tonight with a story that could, quite literally, reshape the global economy overnight. Iran and the United States are escalating tensions again, and the Strait of Hormuz is back in the crosshairs. We're talking about one of the most strategically important choke points on the planet.
Then we'll turn to the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, who is sounding alarms about nuclear risk at a time when the institutions designed to prevent catastrophe are themselves under threat. Energy and security are inseparable topics tonight.
And we'll close with three stories that paint a picture of an energy transition that is accelerating whether politicians support it or not. Coal jobs vanishing, electric buses overtaking hydrogen, and one EV owner's solar data that tells you everything you need to know about where this is all heading. Let's get to work.
Our lead story tonight comes from Al Jazeera, and it is a scenario that keeps energy analysts up at night. Iran has once again raised the specter of closing the Strait of Hormuz amid escalating tensions with the United States. To understand why this matters, you need to understand what flows through that waterway every single day.
According to Al Jazeera's reporting, more than $500 billion in oil and natural gas transits the Strait of Hormuz annually. Let that number settle in. $500 billion. That narrow passage between Iran and Oman, roughly 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, carries approximately 20 to 21 million barrels of oil per day. That is roughly 20% of the world's total oil consumption passing through a corridor you could almost see across on a clear day.
And it's not just crude oil, Alex. The strait is also a critical artery for liquefied natural gas. Qatar, one of the world's largest LNG exporters, ships virtually all of its LNG through the Strait of Hormuz. We're talking about a significant share of global LNG supply that would be immediately disrupted if Iran made good on any threat to block passage.
Now, let's talk about what a disruption would actually look like, because this is where it gets terrifying for global markets. If the strait were blocked, even partially, even temporarily, oil prices would spike immediately. We're not talking about a gradual increase. Energy analysts have modeled these scenarios, and you'd see crude prices potentially doubling within days. Insurance rates for tankers in the region would skyrocket. Shipping companies would begin rerouting, adding weeks and enormous cost to deliveries.
The ripple effects extend far beyond the price at the pump. Countries in Asia, particularly Japan, South Korea, India, and China, are heavily dependent on oil and gas flowing through the strait. Japan imports the vast majority of its crude oil through that choke point. South Korea is in a similar position. A disruption wouldn't just raise prices, it could trigger energy rationing in some of the world's largest economies.
And here's what people need to understand about the geopolitical chess game. Iran knows the strait is its most powerful card. Its military, particularly the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, has invested heavily in asymmetric warfare capabilities specifically designed for this narrow waterway. Fast attack boats, anti-ship missiles, naval mines. The strait is essentially a shooting gallery if Iran decides to use it as one.
But there's a critical question that often gets lost in the saber-rattling. Would Iran actually do it? Blocking the strait would be an act of war by any definition, and it would hurt Iran too, because Iran itself exports oil through that same waterway. The calculus changes, however, if Iran feels it has nothing left to lose, if sanctions have already cut off its economic lifelines and military action seems imminent. That's the danger zone we need to watch.
And here's the part that should concern every American watching tonight. The United States has massive military assets in the region, including the Fifth Fleet headquartered in Bahrain. Any confrontation in the strait risks direct military engagement between the US and Iran. We're not talking about a proxy conflict. We're talking about a potential direct confrontation between two nations in one of the most economically sensitive waterways on Earth.
What's also striking is the lack of strategic alternatives. There is no pipeline or route that can replace the volume flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. Saudi Arabia has some pipeline capacity that bypasses the strait, but it can handle only a fraction of the total flow. The UAE has a pipeline to Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman, but again, limited capacity. The world has known about this vulnerability for decades and has done remarkably little to address it.
Follow the money, and you see who benefits from this instability. Defense contractors see their stocks rise every time tensions escalate. Oil futures traders make fortunes on volatility. And certain producing nations outside the Gulf, the United States included with its shale production, see their market position strengthen when Gulf supply looks uncertain. The question we should all be asking is, who has an interest in keeping these tensions elevated?
And who loses? Ordinary consumers in every country that imports oil. Developing nations that can't absorb price shocks. The global poor who spend the highest percentage of their income on energy and food, both of which are tied to oil prices. This isn't an abstract geopolitical story. This is a story about the grocery bill of a family in Bangladesh, the heating costs of a pensioner in Japan, the transportation budget of a small business in Kenya.
The deeper structural issue here is that the global economy remains catastrophically dependent on fossil fuels flowing through a handful of choke points, and that dependency is a choice. Every year we fail to diversify energy sources and invest in renewables is another year we leave the global economy vulnerable to disruption in a 21-mile wide stretch of water. Keep that in mind as we move through tonight's other stories.
Staying in the realm of global security, our second story tonight connects directly to those tensions we just discussed. Al Jazeera's Talk to Al Jazeera program featured an extensive interview with Rafael Grossi, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, and what he had to say should be a wake-up call about the state of nuclear risk in our world.
Grossi is one of the most important figures in global security that most people have never heard of. The IAEA is the organization responsible for monitoring nuclear programs around the world, verifying compliance with the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and essentially serving as the world's nuclear watchdog. And right now, that watchdog is warning that the dangers are mounting.
In his interview, Grossi addressed the escalating nuclear tensions on multiple fronts. Iran's nuclear program remains a central concern. The IAEA has repeatedly reported that Iran has enriched uranium to 60% purity, which is a short technical step from weapons-grade material at 90%. Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium continues to grow, and the agency's ability to monitor that program has been constrained after Iran reduced cooperation with inspectors.
Let's connect this directly to our first story. If the United States and Iran are heading toward a military confrontation over the Strait of Hormuz, Iran's nuclear capabilities become a central factor in that calculus. A conventional military strike against Iran risks pushing Tehran toward a decision to pursue a nuclear weapon as the ultimate deterrent. This is the nightmare scenario that Grossi has been trying to prevent through diplomacy.
But Grossi's concerns extend beyond Iran. He discussed the broader erosion of the international frameworks designed to prevent nuclear conflict. The UN Security Council, which is supposed to be the ultimate arbiter of international peace and security, is paralyzed by vetoes and geopolitical rivalries. The institutions that were built after World War II to prevent exactly this kind of escalation are showing their age and their limitations.
What struck me most about Grossi's remarks is his candor about institutional reform. This is the head of a major international organization essentially saying the system isn't working as designed. He's calling for reforms to the United Nations structure itself, arguing that the current architecture cannot adequately address 21st-century nuclear risks. When the person whose job it is to keep the world safe from nuclear disaster tells you the tools aren't adequate, you should listen.
There's an energy dimension here that doesn't get enough attention either. Nuclear energy is experiencing a resurgence of interest globally as countries look for low-carbon alternatives to fossil fuels. But the same technology that powers a reactor can, with additional steps, produce material for weapons. The IAEA's dual mandate of promoting peaceful nuclear energy while preventing weapons proliferation is becoming harder to fulfill as more countries pursue nuclear power programs.
And here's the power structure question. Who benefits from a weakened IAEA and a fractured non-proliferation regime? Nuclear-armed states that want to maintain their monopoly on these weapons. Countries pursuing covert programs who prefer less scrutiny. And the broader military-industrial complex that thrives on insecurity. A world where nuclear risks are managed effectively is a world where defense budgets face scrutiny. An unstable nuclear landscape justifies enormous spending.
Who loses? Everyone else. Every civilian in every city that could become a target. Every community downwind of a potential incident. The entire concept of international law and cooperative security. Grossi is essentially pleading for the world to take these institutions seriously before a crisis makes the current dysfunction catastrophic.
The connection between our first two stories is stark. Energy security and nuclear security are two sides of the same coin in the Middle East. The Strait of Hormuz and Iran's nuclear program are interlinked pressure points, and the international system designed to manage both is under severe strain. That's the world we're living in tonight.
Now let's pivot to a story that reveals a different kind of disruption, one happening not in the geopolitical arena but in the American heartland. CleanTechnica reports that the United States is still hemorrhaging coal jobs, and here's the critical part: this is happening regardless of who occupies the White House.
This story cuts through one of the most persistent myths in American energy politics. President Trump campaigned on bringing back coal, promised to revive the industry, rolled back environmental regulations, and positioned himself as coal's champion. And yet the data tells an unforgiving story. Coal jobs continue to disappear. Coal plants continue to close. Coal's share of the electricity generation mix continues to decline.
Let's look at the numbers because they are damning. The U.S. coal industry has been in structural decline for over a decade. Employment in coal mining has fallen dramatically from its peaks. According to CleanTechnica's analysis, the job losses are continuing into 2026 despite the Trump administration's efforts to prop up the industry. Power utilities are making decisions based on economics, not politics, and the economics of coal are brutal.
Here's what's really happening. Natural gas, which became abundant and cheap through the fracking revolution, undercut coal on price years ago. And now renewables, particularly solar and wind, are undercutting both coal and natural gas in many markets. When a utility company can build new solar capacity cheaper than it can operate an existing coal plant, the math is simple. You close the coal plant. No executive order changes that equation.
And this is where the human cost becomes real. These aren't abstract economic statistics. These are communities in West Virginia, Wyoming, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, and Ohio that were built around coal. When a mine closes, it doesn't just eliminate the mining jobs. It eliminates the jobs at the diner that fed the miners, the shop that sold them equipment, the school funded by coal tax revenue. Entire local economies collapse.
What infuriates me about this story is the political dishonesty on display. Telling coal communities that their jobs are coming back is not just wrong, it's cruel. It gives people false hope that delays the hard but necessary work of economic transition. While politicians are making promises they cannot keep, these communities are losing precious time that could be spent retraining workers, attracting new industries, and building economic alternatives.
The data is clear that regions which have invested in transition programs, in retraining for renewable energy jobs, in diversifying their economic base, are faring better than those that waited for coal to come back. The irony is that many coal-producing regions have excellent wind and solar resources. The same workers who built America's coal infrastructure have the skills to build its renewable energy infrastructure if given the opportunity and support.
But here's the structural problem. The federal investment needed to support the transition has been inconsistent. The Inflation Reduction Act directed significant funding toward clean energy manufacturing and deployment, but the current administration's approach has sent mixed signals. You can't build a transition strategy when the policy landscape shifts every 4 years.
Follow the money again. The coal executives and shareholders have largely already diversified their investments. The major coal companies know the trajectory. The people left holding the bag are the workers and the communities. This is a story about who has the power to adapt and who doesn't, and about a political system that tells comfortable lies rather than confronting uncomfortable truths.
And let's be blunt about the environmental dimension. Every coal plant that stays open longer than necessary is pumping additional carbon dioxide into an atmosphere that is already overloaded. The climate crisis doesn't care about political promises. Every ton of coal burned brings us closer to thresholds we cannot uncross. The continued operation of uneconomic coal plants isn't just bad economics. It's an act of intergenerational harm.
The coal story is ultimately a preview of what happens when an industry's time has passed and political leadership refuses to acknowledge reality. The question isn't whether coal will decline further. It will. The question is whether we help affected communities navigate that change or abandon them while pretending the change isn't happening.
Now let's turn to a story that shows exactly where the energy future is heading at the individual level. Electrek reports on an EV owner who installed solar panels on his home and then tracked the real-world data over 14,000 miles of driving. The results are a case study in the economics of the energy transition.
This is one of those stories that cuts through all the political noise and gives you hard numbers. This EV driver did what millions of Americans are considering. He combined an electric vehicle with rooftop solar, and then he meticulously tracked his energy production, consumption, and costs. After 14,000 miles, the data paints a compelling picture.
Here's what makes this significant. The combination of solar panels and an EV fundamentally changes the economics of both transportation and home energy. When you generate your own electricity from the sun and use it to charge your car, you're essentially driving on free fuel after the initial investment pays off. The data from this driver shows that the cost per mile drops dramatically compared to gasoline, and even compared to charging from the grid.
Let's put this in perspective for the average household. Americans spend a significant amount annually on gasoline and home electricity combined. A solar plus EV setup can slash both of those costs simultaneously. The upfront investment is real, solar installation and an EV purchase are not cheap, but the total cost of ownership over the life of the system tells a very different story than the sticker price suggests.
What I find most powerful about this story is that it's not coming from a manufacturer's marketing department or a government agency. It's real-world data from an actual consumer. This is a person who put their money where the data was, tracked every kilowatt hour, and is sharing the results for anyone to evaluate. That kind of transparency is exactly what the energy conversation needs.
There's a broader economic signal here too. When individual consumers can effectively generate their own transportation fuel from their rooftop, the entire model of centralized energy production and distribution starts to shift. Utilities, oil companies, and gas stations all face disruption not from a competitor, but from their own customers becoming self-sufficient.
And think about what this means for energy security, circling back to our lead story. Every home with solar panels and an EV battery is a home that is less dependent on oil flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. Less dependent on natural gas prices. Less vulnerable to the geopolitical disruptions we discussed earlier. Distributed renewable energy isn't just an environmental choice. It's a national security strategy.
The challenge, and we should be honest about this, is access. Solar panels and EVs require upfront capital that many families simply don't have. If the energy transition only benefits homeowners with good credit and disposable income, it becomes another driver of inequality. The policy question is whether we design programs that bring these benefits to renters, to lower-income families, to communities that have historically been left behind.
That's exactly right. The technology works. The economics work. The question is whether the politics work. Whether we build an energy system that serves everyone or one that creates a new class of energy haves and have-nots. This one driver's data proves the concept. Now the question is scale and equity.
Speaking of scale and what actually works at the fleet level, our final story tonight takes us to Europe with a report that has significant implications for the hydrogen economy narrative. CleanTechnica reports that fuel cell bus deliveries in the European Union peaked in 2025, and the trajectory tells us something important about the future of clean transportation.
This story deserves careful attention because it challenges a narrative that has consumed billions of dollars in investment and enormous amounts of political capital. For years, hydrogen fuel cells have been promoted as a key pillar of the clean transportation future, particularly for heavy vehicles like buses and trucks. The European data now suggests that battery electric technology has won this race decisively in the bus market.
Let me unpack the numbers here because they matter. According to Transport and Environment's latest European city bus market report, battery electric buses now dominate new bus registrations across the EU. They have surged ahead of schedule, capturing a far larger share of new orders than industry projections had anticipated. Meanwhile, fuel cell bus deliveries peaked in 2025 and are now declining.
Why is this happening? It comes down to fundamental physics and economics. Battery electric buses are roughly 3 times more energy efficient than hydrogen fuel cell buses. Here's why. With a battery bus, you take electricity, put it in a battery, and drive. With a hydrogen fuel cell bus, you take electricity, use it to produce hydrogen through electrolysis, compress or liquefy the hydrogen, transport it, store it, then convert it back to electricity in a fuel cell, and then drive. Every one of those conversion steps loses energy.
That efficiency gap translates directly into cost. When you need 3 times as much renewable energy to move a hydrogen bus the same distance as a battery bus, the operating economics become prohibitive. Transit agencies across Europe have done the math and reached the same conclusion. Battery electric is cheaper to buy, cheaper to operate, and the charging infrastructure is simpler to build and maintain.
Now, here's where this story intersects with power structures and money. Enormous investments have been made in hydrogen infrastructure and technology. Major oil and gas companies have positioned hydrogen as their bridge to relevance in a clean energy future. Hydrogen allows them to maintain a centralized fuel production and distribution model that looks a lot like their existing business. A world of battery electric vehicles charged by distributed solar is a world where their business model becomes obsolete.
That's a critical insight, Alex. The hydrogen economy, at least for surface transportation, has significant backing from incumbent fossil fuel interests precisely because it preserves the centralized fuel supply chain they know how to profit from. Battery electric vehicles and distributed renewable generation represent a fundamentally different economic model, one that shifts power away from large fuel suppliers and toward individual consumers and communities.
I want to be fair here. Hydrogen likely has genuine applications in sectors where batteries face real limitations, certain industrial processes, potentially long-haul shipping, perhaps some aviation applications. But the European bus data is now showing clearly that for ground transportation, the battery electric pathway is winning on both performance and cost. The market is rendering its verdict.
And the scale of this shift is remarkable. The fact that battery electric buses are ahead of schedule in market penetration tells you that once the economics tip, adoption accelerates faster than models predict. This is a pattern we've seen with solar panels, with wind turbines, and now with electric vehicles. Technology cost curves don't care about political preferences.
The losers in this hydrogen versus battery story are the taxpayers and investors who funded hydrogen bus programs that are now being overtaken by a superior technology. And the communities that built hydrogen refueling infrastructure that may become stranded assets. The lesson is clear: when making multi-billion-dollar infrastructure bets, follow the physics and the economics, not the lobbying.
Now, Alex, let's step back and connect all 5 of tonight's stories, because the pattern that emerges is striking. We started with the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point that holds the global economy hostage because of our dependence on centralized fossil fuel supplies. We moved to nuclear risks that are intertwined with those same energy geopolitics. Then we saw coal jobs disappearing despite political promises, an EV owner generating his own fuel from the sun, and European transit agencies choosing batteries over hydrogen.
The thread running through every one of these stories is the transition from centralized to distributed energy. The old model, drill it or mine it in one place, ship it through vulnerable choke points, burn it somewhere else, is being challenged at every level. And the new model, generate electricity locally from renewable sources, store it in batteries, use it efficiently, is winning on cost, on security, and on environmental impact.
The resistance to this transition is coming from exactly where you'd expect. From fossil fuel companies that profit from the old model. From governments that derive geopolitical power from controlling energy resources. From politicians who find it easier to promise a return to the past than to lead toward the future. The Strait of Hormuz matters because we've chosen to keep it mattering. Every solar panel installed reduces that dependency incrementally.
And the human cost of resisting this transition is mounting. Coal communities waiting for jobs that will never return. Consumers paying volatile energy prices driven by geopolitical instability. Taxpayers funding both military protection of oil shipping lanes and subsidies for fossil fuels. The true cost of our energy system includes aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf, black lung disease in Appalachia, and a destabilizing climate.
What gives me some measure of hope in tonight's reporting is that the transition is happening despite the political headwinds. The economics are too powerful. That EV driver with solar panels isn't waiting for permission from Washington. European transit agencies aren't waiting for the hydrogen lobby to catch up. Utilities are closing coal plants because the math demands it. Markets are moving.
But markets alone won't solve the equity problem, Maya. They won't retrain coal miners. They won't put solar panels on low-income housing. They won't ensure that the benefits of this transition reach everyone. That requires political courage, real investment, and honest leadership. And right now, we're getting precious little of any of those.
That's the challenge we leave you with tonight. The energy transition is not a question of if. It's a question of how. Do we manage it wisely, helping communities adapt and ensuring broad access to the benefits? Or do we let it happen chaotically, enriching those who are already positioned and abandoning those who aren't?
And on the security front, every day we delay diversifying away from fossil fuels is another day that the Strait of Hormuz, that 21-mile-wide choke point, holds the global economy in its grip. Another day that nuclear risks remain entangled with energy geopolitics. Another day that we're vulnerable.
That's our report for tonight. We'll keep tracking these stories because the energy decisions being made right now, in corporate boardrooms, in government offices, and on rooftops across the country, will shape the world for decades to come.
I'm Alex Truth. Do your own research, verify what we've told you, and demand better from the people who make decisions on your behalf.
And I'm Maya Clarity. The truth doesn't pick sides, but it does pick facts. We'll see you next time on Truth